Let me welcome you to SETIcon. My name's John Gertz, and I'm going to be the moderator of this panel, but I'm also wearing another hat. I'm the chairman of the board of the SETI Institute, and in that capacity, I would like to very much welcome you all to SETIcon 2, and hope that you find this to be a fantastic experience. Margaret, do you want to join us on stage? I think I even have do I have a sign for you?
Sure.
Oh, what, for me? Oh, I'm you. Okay, well,
down here.
here, grab a seat.
I'll come down here. Yeah.
You know what? Why don't you sit here? Take my seat. Take my seat. And I'll sit here.
All right. Okay. Sorry.
Hello, Margaret.
Yeah, you're not on the program, but that's all right.
Special guest.
Special guest by.
Margaret Race.
All right. So I want to welcome you to the SETI Institute. It's second SETIcon. Hope you find this to be an absolutely enriching program. But I do also want to say, just as an introductory note, that this is one of our best abilities to help raise some money to help fund this great work of the 65 or so senior scientists at the SETI Institute and the plethora of work that they do for us across the range of planetary science, exobiology or astrobiology, and of course SETI. One of the best ways that you can help is to look at the auction next door, find the item of your magnificent choice. There's some fantastic items there, and be assured and know in the knowledge that every penny you ever bid or spend next door goes to the support of our fantastic scientists. Okay, on with the program. Mars. Well, everybody knows that it's pretty easy to get to Mars. You just go up the 101, take the exit at Moffett Field, and then get straight up from there, no problem. The question is that we're asking the panelists to address today is, how difficult really is it to survive the trip? Is it worth making the trip? Is this something that can be easy? Can we put colonies there? Let's address it all, but first a brief introduction. We have to my immediate right Margaret Race, who's here at the SETI Institute. Because she's quickly joining us, I didn't have an official bio for her, but I know Margaret's work well. She is one of the world's leading authorities on how to safely go to Mars and safely bring people back in the sense of contamination. We don't want to send any of our bugs there. We certainly don't want to bring any of theirs here. Margaret is a leader in worrying about that topic, and technologically, legally, and scientifically. Tom Jones is a planetary scientist, author, and veteran NASA astronaut. On the last of his 4 shuttle missions, Dr. Jones led 3 separate spacewalks to install the centerpiece of the International Space Station and the American Destiny Laboratory. His current interests include asteroid exploration, the use of space resources, and planetary defense. Pascal Lee is a scientist at the SETI Institute, planetary scientist. His research focuses on asteroids, impact craters, and particularly Mars. His field work is based in the North Pole, at Devon Island, which is considered to be the closest Mars analog. So that's where he tests equipment for going to Mars, and counter to conventional wisdom, it's that Mars was climatically cold throughout its history. Pascal was the first one to propose that instead of it being warm and wet. Nathalie Cabrol, also a scientist at the SETI Institute. Gosh, what did it say about Natalie? She does it all. She's currently designing a lander. I'm going to do this extemporaneously in a way instead of reading the fine print here. Natalie is currently designing for NASA a lake lander for Titan. She explores up in the Atacama Desert, the lakes. Did I mispronounce that? The Atacama Desert. a lake that is one of the highest lakes in the world, or maybe the highest lake in the world, for extremophiles, where she does her diving. And she is an expert on Mars. She was the one that suggested to NASA that they use Gustav crater as the landing site for the last rovers, or one of the last rovers. And her research involves how and why planets evolve, whether or not they could ever have hosted habitats for life, and how climate change impacts their habitability. Okay, now, with no further ado, what I'd like to do is invite each of our panelists to make an opening statement, a brief statement. Then I'm going to have the four of them mix it up a little bit, and then we'll open it up to questions.
I think I should
Do
defer
you want
to
to defer
others.
to
I'll
Tom?
come in last.
Okay, you'll come in last. Let's start from the other side. Natalie.
Yeah, I really like the title of this panel, but I would phrase it a little differently. Right now, we have no problem surviving our trip to Mars. There is no trip to Mars. We have to ask the community how we are going to survive the next decade without an exploration program to Mars. So I think we should talk a little bit about that too. But it is clear that Mars is the closest environment to our own home here, and it's probably the next destination for humanity. Certainly a planet where we're going to learn how to become an interstellar species. And so we can delay it for 10 years or 100 years, and it's too bad for our generation, but it's a necessary step to take, because exploration, first and foremost, is about survival. And Carl Sagan put it very nicely. He said, space, life, or doom. So Mars is definitely our next destination.
Pascal?
Okay, good morning. I actually wanted to share just two thoughts quickly. One is that why has a mission to Mars not happened yet? It was supposed to happen in the wake of Apollo. We had many decades, even since then, to make it happen. Why hasn't it happened? And I think we have to really understand why countries and nations undertake great journeys of exploration. It's never for science. It really is never for science. It's to serve national interest. Showcasing science can be part of that, but it's really national interest. James Cook was not sent to the South Pacific because the British Navy was interested in botany. Okay? He was sent to the South Pacific because the French were there. President Kennedy and President Johnson didn't commit to getting us to the moon because we were interested in lunar rocks in the mid-60s. It was because the Soviet Union might get there, and they were poised to do a number of firsts as well before that. So we had some catching up to do. So from my perspective, there has to be a strategic interest for a nation like ours or community of nations to commit the resources to go to a place like Mars. And I think we are reaching the time when it has become this. It has become a global strategic advantage for the nations who are willing to do these kinds of ventures in space, who are committed to the technology and the requirement that it will take to come together and do something. So I am hopeful that within my lifetime I will see an international human mission to Mars happen, and that's because the countries who will endeavor to make this happen will see it as being in their strategic advantage, and hopefully it will be a global effort because it's actually in the strategic interest of humanity.
Tom?
I really agree with the strategy that Pascal has announced and talked about. I think it's going to be perhaps 2040, if not longer, before we actually see humans on Mars under the current level of support that NASA and partner space agencies get. So something has to change to accelerate that timetable. If it's business as usual, it's going to be a long, long time getting to Mars. One of the reasons why it's taking so long, and it will take so long under the current plans that we see, are the risks posed to human explorers on the way to Mars. Having been to the space station, I know that we're investigating some of the risk factors that we'll have to conquer in order to undertake a successful expedition to Mars. Everybody is familiar with microgravity challenges of living in free fall for months, years at a time on the way to Mars. To some extent, those are being those effects are being countered with research and with practice on the space station. The exercise combination that astronauts tackle in free fall for 6 months on the station can be applied directly to Mars trips. So it seems like the combination of aerobic exercise on a treadmill or a bike ergometer, plus the skeletal loading that you can do with a resistance device, one that's called the ARED on the space station right now, seems to alleviate a lot of the muscular symptoms of free fall. It also seems to be counteracting some of the skeletal problems, the loss of calcium in the skeleton that we see in free fall. It's not entirely a satisfactory solution yet. Maybe combining that with a better understanding of how we can pharmaceutically address the problem with drugs might help us preserve heart, lung, muscle, and bone health in free fall. To me, more worrisome is the radiation risk of being outside the Earth's magnetosphere for years at a time. I think those are largely unknown risks. NASA is starting to investigate that quantitatively with radiation experiments and accelerators on Earth, and we'll have to send spacecraft and living things outside the magnetosphere to check out our countermeasures and our understanding in the next decade, in the 2020s, to really get a handle on the galactic cosmic ray risk and the risk from solar storms. That's an unsolved problem at this point. All of those are details in our general societal aversion to risk. And I frankly can't imagine now that the NASA managers that I know that sent me into space on the shuttle and helped build the space station are ready to sign on the dotted line to put humans on a mission to Mars. No government bureaucrat that I know is going to sign up for the safety risks that we understand today and sign on the line and say, yep, I'm ready to be responsible for the health and safety of this crew. We just don't know enough to quantify and reduce those risks. So it's going to be so important in the decades to come, in the 10 or 15 years ahead of us, to undertake Earth-Moon missions, to get out to the nearby asteroids so that we can understand, quantify, and then drive down the risks of the human participants in Mars expeditions. And in closing, I think that the real key to overcoming risk aversion is to build up experience in Earth-Moon space, in deep space beyond the magnetosphere, but in the neighborhood of the Earth and the Moon. And we need to start having humans involved in tapping into nearby resources from the lunar surface, from the asteroids that come close to us. Get this kind of working experience, getting our hands dirty, getting our spacesuits dirty, with harvesting the wealth, the space resources that can fuel our rockets, provide drinking water and oxygen, and then provide eventually an economic return on those space materials, whether it's energy from solar power beamed back to the Earth, whether it's strategic metals that we can harvest from the asteroids. We need to actually develop an economy between the Earth and the Moon that can start to pay for future expeditions to Mars. And it's only when we are making money in space in a significant way that adds to our global economy, our national economy, that we'll be able to afford the risks and the wealth that it'll take us to get to Mars.
Margaret?
Okay, I agree with everything that's been said, and where I come in is a different place. So if we go, when we go, we definitely want to go responsibly. And this notion of risk is a very real one. We have had 4 decades of really wonderful experience with space station, with shuttles, and everything's been on orbit. And now we're having to say, what does it take to go onto a planetary surface? We saw with the lunar missions in Apollo, the tremendous problems with dust. Now, mind you that the moon is very close, and everything we've done for years now has been on low Earth orbit or geostationary orbit with satellites. Now we're talking about going to the moon and then on to Mars. We don't have anything equivalent to those kind of durations. This mission would be roughly a 3-year mission, 9 months just to get there. When we think about astronauts on orbit, they're on orbit for less than that. When you're talking a 3-year round trip, not submarines, not anything else do we have these kind of durations. So the 500-day Mars study that was recently completed started to look at the behavior, but you don't have the microgravity, you don't have the radiation. To think about the other things, we have to think about food. At what point do you move from, say, putting a seed in Martian soil and seeing if a plant can grow? That's great. Could you get a hybrid biology? At what point does it move from an experimental plant to food? What about water? Can you melt it and use it? So there's lots of science that has to be done. Other science, what do you do with all the waste? Do you bring it back with you, like we bring back waste and materials from cargo, in cargo bays on the shuttle coming back? Or do you bury it there? Is that okay to do if there might be Martian life in the soils? What about the physiology, the pathophysiology that would happen to people when you're up there? What about behavior, human behavior? It doesn't matter all the best protocols that you have. If people don't follow them because they're depressed or they're unable to or something like that, you can have all sorts of problems. Communication, rescue. You can only launch up to Mars every 26 months. That's the launch window. So if something happens, you've left them up there. So ethicists ask questions. Is that okay? What does it take for informed consent for an astronaut crew? What kind of responsibilities do we have? So in addition to all the incredible things that people do in planning missions and doing analog studies all over the place, or drawing in our information from what we've learned on orbit and space station and shuttle and all the other missions that we've gone on, we have to think beyond, because we're taking a huge step. And it doesn't mean we're risk averse. It means that we're making good risk decisions based on really good risk assessments. And if you've never done something, you have zero in the amount of data. So I come in where the Outer Space Treaty says you do your exploration responsibly, and you do it in such a way that you protect, in this case, planetary protection says you protect Mars when you go there. You protect your astronauts and crew, and you protect Earth when you come back. Could you bring back a contaminated astronaut that would have something? You've got to ask those kind of questions as well. So the questions are huge, and they're so much, they touch every area of science and commercial endeavors. It's really fun. It's a great place to be right now.
Well, can I ask, Natalie, do you want to respond to anything you've heard here?
You know, my position on that is that I explore many places, many isolated places. So my view on this would be, of course, it's on Earth. It's not on another planet. There is a lot of parallel with what's going on right now with the first steps we took several hundred years ago, just crossing the ocean and getting to places where, yes, indeed, people were getting into boats. They didn't have any ways of phoning home, calling home and say we're in trouble. There were the storms and they were lost. We have to accept that exploration will go with risk. And I think to some point, we have to understand the risk we are taking, but we shouldn't be risk adverse, which means that we are going for it. Once we leave for Mars, we go for it, and we know that one of the outcomes might be that nobody comes back. And somewhere, somehow, we should diminish that risk, but we should be okay with it, because this is the way exploration happens, you know. But on the other hand, I would also say that, yeah, we landed on other places. We didn't know about diseases. How many villages, how many civilizations were destroyed just because we met with other people. We had no immune systems, that had no immune system to new diseases. So yes, there is a very big risk. Should we go to Mars and just land there and, you know, contaminate everything or being contaminated? No, I'm not saying we should do that. Now we know it. But at some point, where do we say, how do we know it is safe for a human to go? Because a human is a bacteria, a virus factory. No matter what you touch, no matter where you go, yeah, you know, I'm not going to say especially you, Pascal, but we know that. So where is the point where you say, you know, let's go? On the other hand, you could say, well, we already have tons of Martian rocks falling on our heads, and they are in the Antarctica, so maybe we already have some of the Martian material right here on Earth. Another point that I wanted to just touch on, and goes back to something that was said by May yesterday during her wonderful presentation. She was talking about how important to choose where you are going with. And I know that for a fact because I spent many weeks isolated on top of mountains or in the middle of the desert, and it's, you know, quote-unquote isolation. We still can take a satellite phone and call and if there is something wrong. But who you are teaming with is really critical. You don't know what isolation can do to people. I've seen people going nuts about things that are ridiculous. You would solve this question in 2 minutes. The point is that you have to go along very well, because no matter what happens, something, you will have arguments and things will happen. You need to be able to deal with them. So you need to be able to handle a team. And that team needs to understand that the goal of the mission is more important than personal interests. And so it will take a lot of psychological studies. A lot of them are already going on. There are some pretend studies that are going on, fake missions. Going to Mars, and oh God, I wish I would see this in my lifetime, and I wish I'd be there. I'd be the one to be there, like everybody else here. But it is going to take a lot of time. It is going to take a lot of thinking about. As a closing statement, I would say that if you were asking me right now, and assuming that I'm bug-free, which is not the case, and I'm the go-ahead to go to Mars, not knowing if I can come back, but just to see what's there and what we can do there and what's the next step for mankind, I'd go. I sign now, right now.
Pascal, do you want to react to anything?
Sure, briefly. One comment, which is, as much as I don't think that the motivation for going to Mars is strictly science, I think that science is really what will define our activity on Mars for a long time, until we do other things, such as opening a law firm or running a bank. And this is an important thing to realize. For example, if you look at the Antarctic program, for instance, many countries that are technologically advanced have an Antarctic program. It's a costly affair. They're not in Antarctica because of the science. They are in Antarctica for geopolitical, strategic reasons. Of course, once you're committed to being there, the nature of your activity is going to be science. It's a very important distinction. It's just like going to the moon. We didn't go to the moon for the moon rocks, but once we got there, well, that was the most important thing for us to do for science. So I think that if we do commit ourselves to going to Mars, it will be very important that we do it the right way, so that our science activities are properly done. And this notion of being very careful not to contaminate Mars or be contaminated back on Earth by Mars is a very important, and I think a prime directive in our exploration of Mars, because otherwise we would, in some sense, defeat the purpose of our entire science program on Mars.
But let me ask the three of you that have now raised this issue, is it really not just tilting at windmills with, how many trillion bacteria in each of us and our waste products and so forth? Isn't it basically hopeless, just in the same sense that earthworms, rats, honeybees, and so forth are all here in America where they never were before? Not to mention, is it, yeah, go on, Lou.
Okay, so the Outer Space Treaty says in Article 9 that you have to avoid harmful contamination. So harmful contamination, the only ones who have gone to the moon and beyond have been the scientists. If you think about everybody else, they're in low Earth orbit or geostationary. So the scientists have said, let's think about contamination in terms of how it would affect our science. We don't want to contaminate and go looking up there for life and then find we brought it with us. So that's why it's so clearly spacecraft and rovers are sterilized and really clean before they go. Obviously, when humans go, you are going to allow some contamination. That's the nature of the beast. I can breathe on you, and I'm contaminating, but it's not harmful contamination. So that question of what is harmful or not will not preclude humans going to another planet. And certainly when we land at a site, we will contaminate it, but if it's clearly taken care of, that's okay.
But how,
so we have
how in the world would you know what microbes,
So how in the-
microbes are harmful to
So right now
Mars?
it's built around the notion of we're looking to see if Mars has life. So when we've gone to the moon, we know it doesn't have life. The moon doesn't have the same level of planetary protection controls as a place like Mars does, which seems to be habitable, where we could perhaps find life underground. But if we haven't found it on the surface every time we've looked, that's okay. It says the surface isn't amenable to bacterial life, say, so it's probably no Martian life on the surface. But when we go deep, maybe we want to be taking extra precautions. So that's what planetary protection looks at, and right now all planetary protection is doing is thinking about protecting science. And they're already starting to move into saying, what would it mean for human missions? And it's obvious that when human missions go, there will be a different level of contamination. Will it be harmful? Probably not. But we need to say it. So it's like saying, thou shalt have clean water. So that's a nice statement in a law, but at what point do you turn that into something you can implement? Is it swimmable water, drinkable water, fishable water? What do you think about the standards, setting them based on people with HIV or the average person or the geriatric or a little kid? So those standards are things that are set based on science, and they're set with lots of other things going into it. Similarly, it will happen with Mars or any other planet.
Tom, do you want to react to anything before we open it up to questions?
I don't have much expertise in this area, but I'm hopeful that a couple of factors will work in our favor at Mars. And that is, it's a harsh enough environment that when humans go there, they're going to be encapsulated in spacesuits, in habitats. Since we've got to wear that protective gear anyway, wouldn't it be nice if the surface of Mars was hazardous enough to sterilize itself after we contaminate the surface? So let's hope that all the vermin that we carry on our bodies actually just can't survive on the Martian surface environment with the radiation, with the perhaps oxidizing soils there. Maybe that will help reduce our footprint, so to speak. So let's knock on wood and hope it works out in our
That's
favor.
already the view. That's already the
Well,
view.
let's bring in the audience, and the gentleman in the back, and I guess we've got a microphone here. Please speak into the microphone because we're recording this on video, and so everyone else can hear, obviously.
I want to expand on the one-way comment. Would it ever be possible to design a one-way mission on purpose and have those astronauts and scientists stay there for an extended period of time to send back a long telemetry of data, as opposed to a mission that would only be there for a year on the surface of Mars?
Well, first of all the missions to New England and Jamestown and so forth were all one-way missions also, so that sometimes is the nature of exploration. But who wants to tackle that?
Well, I'll take
Tom?
a very quick stab. I think that's a very good suggestion. I don't think we should be locked into the mode of round trips. They're not going to be scientific expeditions purely. There'll be other motivations. So I think this hybrid of perhaps government-developed technology, then commercially driven expeditions might be the successful path. And in that case, I don't think there's going to be any lack of people to volunteer for a one-way trip. As long as there's a prospect of regular resupply, some sort of a colonization effort going on that then returns later on, the chance of you coming home, but not a guarantee.
Among ethicists, I've heard talk of that it's, as long as you get to informed consent, you can allow yourself to do lots of things. And so that's not an unethical thing to do, to have a one-way mission.
The woman in the back of the microphone.
Would bacteria from Earth not get to Mars through natural processes?
In general, as I understand it, I'm not an astronomer, but it could transfer, but if a meteorite makes it to Earth, having come from Mars, it takes thousands or tens of thousands of years to get there. Likewise, anything that would be ejected from Earth would take a very long time if it would go in that direction to Mars. So the chances of anything surviving that length of time in a dormant state are very, very low. They can get there, but probability is very low, and when you bring back samples, you're bringing them back fully contained, and you're bringing them back in less than a year. So that's the difference.
Natalie, did you want to add?
I just can add something to Margaret's comment. That goes back to what we call planetary exchange, and that's a reality that, planetary materials exchanged between planets. We are receiving Martian meteorites on Earth, but it's also true that there might be Earth material on Mars, which brought the usual question: are we Martian because we don't know where life originated? But so there is a chance that terrestrial material already made it to Mars, and vice versa. So it's just a matter of not only getting there, but finding an anchor there. How you can jumpstart life. It's not, you know, if it's terrestrial bacteria, then we are fine. There's not going to be cross-contamination.
Sir?
Without intruding too much on Dr. Jones's experience with, personal experience with microgravity, I assume he's the only person in this room who has experienced microgravity directly. And I'm kind of wondering if he's willing to share with us any deleterious effects he has personally experienced with this without intruding too much in his medical history.
I've had short trips to space. The longest was 18 days. What surprised me was how rapidly your body adapts to free fall. It's a real treat. You're like a kid in a candy store the first time you go to free fall, and you're weightless, and you can eat your shrimp cocktail on the ceiling and sleep on the wall, and it's just marvelous to see how your body changes up there. And that, you know, it's not comfortable perhaps for the first couple of days. Your face swells up as the fluid shifts from your lower limbs up into your torso and your head. So I had a sunburn, it looked like, for the first couple of days as I had all this extra fluid in my face. So I'm flushed, had a headache, stuffy nose. So you can medicate for that, and then eventually your body starts to dump what it perceives as an excess of fluid up here because of the baroreceptors in your neck, and you start to dump that excess fluid as urine. And then you sort of equilibrate after a couple of days, and the headaches go away, and your nose gets back to somewhat normal. So then you forget that you're in free fall after a couple of days, and you wake up in the morning, and you don't say to yourself, gosh, I'm weightless, I have to move this way. You just move. Just as you walk out the door of this ballroom, you don't think about walking out, you just do it. So that's a very quick adaptation. And then you're quite happy for the time that you're up there. I exercised every couple of days just to keep heart and lungs and muscles in shape for spacewalks and things like that. Now, after 18 days, I came home, and you can talk to space station astronauts and talk about their readaptation, but mine were pretty minor. You feel heavy for about an hour after you come home. You are unbalanced in terms of your fine motor skills. Your brain has learned to turn off your inner ear balance mechanisms, so your otoliths don't work very well, your brain doesn't listen, and now all that you have keeping you erect on terra firma are your eyeballs. And if you don't have the visual cues as to which way is vertical, you'll fall over. So I would run into walls in the first couple of days, walking around corners. How hard is it to walk around a corner? Well, I would bump into the opposite wall as I made the turn. I tried to drive down the street in my car going over to the Space Center to look at my film from the mission, and as I drove down the street, I put on the blinker, I made a 90-degree right-hand turn, and both right wheels of the car ran up over the curb. Why did that happen? Because I didn't have any internal sense of acceleration as I went around the corner. So I parked the car on the curb, and I had my wife drive me to work. And there are all sorts of funny stories like this. It takes about 3 days for your balance to come back. Space station folks come back, and they go into physical therapy to get their muscle tone back and to get their coordination back. They have a coach for about 6 weeks, and a lot of them are nauseous when they come home. They're nauseated by being back in gravity. Their balance is so upset by that readaptation that it takes them about a week to achieve equilibrium.
But on a Mars trip, is artificial gravity a possibility by rotating the
Sure. You can counteract it, one would guess, by artificial gravity. But the engineering solution to apply that is a weight penalty, and that's a cost penalty because of the cost of $20,000 a kilo of bringing this stuff up off the surface of the Earth. So if you can avoid the engineering weight that's added to provide artificial gravity, you would like to do that. So that's why we're trying to find out the human response and get comfortable with it at the space station. So, I guess the free fall environment is not the most critical obstacle. I think we can adapt and readapt on the surface of Mars. If you're going to be on the surface of Mars for a year and a half during your expedition, taking a week to readapt is not a huge penalty in terms of productivity.
All right.
Okay. I have a question and follow-up on gravity. We have experience with 1G and with microgravity. I guess we don't have any experience with 1/6G, that is the moon, and 3/8G, that is Mars. Do we have any feel at all for how to spend years on Mars at 3/8? Would that be a problem or not? And are there any plans to go up and create an orbiter with things on a tether where you'd get lunar gravity at one module and Mars gravity on another.
Okay, I think that's a great experiment for the space station. It's an obvious experiment to have a little centrifuge and to rotate small rats and things like that for months at 1/3 gravity and find out what the biological effects are. I don't think anybody knows the answers. Welcome comments.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, is it ethical to terraform Mars?
The question is it ethical to terraform Mars? People have suggested that. I think there's so many other issues that would come before something like that that we don't really have to take it up except hypothetically. The notion of terraforming is if, as Chris McKay from NASA Ames has said, is if you think about all life that we have here on Earth, everything that we have, all of our laws, all of our ethics, and all of our religious systems are based on life as we know it. And everything that is good about life is something that keeps it going. So the idea would, if we find that Mars doesn't have life, is it a responsibility of ours to put life up there, to terraform and turn it into something that would be habitable for us or for Martians? And so that's a question that's way down the line in terms of the ethics, but it's a question that has come up. And I don't know. I mean, to me, it's a question that sometimes ethicists will debate forever and ever, and in the meantime, we go on doing lots of things. Is it ethical to pollute our planet? Well, at some level, no, but that doesn't stop us from living here. So I don't know that that question would stop us from going someplace.
Okay.
Do you know of any other minerals that can be found on Earth and on Mars besides oxidized iron?
Okay, so that's a great question. Mars has had a very diverse geology, even more complicated geology than the Moon. It has volcanism, it has tectonics, although not plate tectonics, so the planet's not broken up in continents like the Earth is. So pretty much the entire suite of minerals that we encounter on the Earth, except perhaps the ones that involve a lot of water, but even then we're not sure yet, are expected to be found on Mars. We also know that there are some minerals that were found on Mars that are not common on the Earth. But we, on the other hand, have not quite yet identified minerals that literally do not exist on the Earth. So that is telling us a little bit what chemistry tells us in general, which is, Mars is not alien from a chemical sense compared to the Earth. I mean, there are differences, but the laws of chemistry, the laws of physics apply on Mars as they did on the Earth. Mars, being a planet big enough to have a complex geological history, has had a chance to develop and evolve a bunch of minerals that we find on the Earth. So in addition to iron oxide, there are many other things like sphalerite and jarosite. These are sulfur compounds, for example, that we find in Martian rocks.
I would expect nothing that we'd want to bring back home for any economic reasons, right?
Yeah, so far as we know, we haven't found this enrichment in a particular platinum group metal or rare earth element that would, somehow change the economy of going to Mars. But I actually want to have a quick comment on this terraforming question. So the idea is, are we allowed to conquer Mars and invade it if we were to find a biosphere on Mars, with its own indigenous life forms? And I think the answer is, it's not a good idea at first. We really need to study that life to understand it. There could be an entire new pharmacy industry or biochemistry that we would discover from life that would be maybe based on a different form of DNA or no DNA at all. So I think there has to be a phase scientifically for us to investigate life on Mars with utter respect for it. But on the other hand, once we are on Mars and it has become part of the human realm of endeavors, I would doubt that we would somehow treat Mars and Mars life any differently from life that we commonly destroy on the Earth, if it's a matter of our own survival. We go after some viruses that we don't like because they threaten our livelihood. If Martian viruses were somehow a potential threat to us and we had a way to eradicate them, I think the answer is we would go after that life. And you know what, whether it's ethical or not, it's the survival of the fittest. We're just applying a law of nature.
Pascal, is anything missing in the mineralogy of Mars that would make it very difficult to inhabit? So, for example, if it lacks silicon, we'd have to import all of our computers, you know, that sort of thing. Is there anything missing there, or is it sufficiently similar to Earth that...
As far as we know from a elemental standpoint, which is the best characterization we have of the surface of Mars. So, in other words, we don't know that many minerals which are combinations of atomic elements on Mars, but we know of a lot of, we've inventoried the elements that are there. And as far as we know, Mars has, if anything, more than the Earth has to offer at its surface, because the Earth, in some sense, is a bigger, more complex planet. Many of the elements that we find precious, okay, like iridium and the rare earth elements by definition, okay, or the platinum group metals, those things have tended to sink into the core or into the inside of the Earth along with the core's formation of our planet, so that the outer parts of the Earth are now depleted in these metals, and that's why they are precious. Mars has not had this same complete level of mixing as the Earth has had. It's accumulated a lot of asteroids in its late history that were not blended completely into the rest of the planet. So the sense is we probably will find more iridium, more platinum group metals and things like that in the crust of Mars, more easily accessible than they are on the Earth.
So it could be of commercial benefit to Earth as an export item?
Could be.
Okay, good. Camilla, is it? Do you have the microphone?
Oh,
Go ahead.
that's just the bed, that's the chicken.
Oh, okay.
I've actually contracted for Johnson and done a couple of Mars analog projects with the mind to a more medical bent toward bone demineralization, plasma volume changes, vestibular system changes, and so forth. We also watch with great interest the Mars analogs in the desert in Utah and Antarctica and so forth, and the Mars 500 by Russia. One of the most disturbing things I think I ever heard a doctor say to a scientist back and forth when I joined the project was someone said, "We don't want to fund it until we know we can survive." But the other person said, "Well, they don't know if we'll survive, so they don't want to fund it." And that's always the kind of budget chicken and egg going on. What stops us from putting together our own Mars 500? Where do you think the state of that research is? And what direction do you think it needs to go in now that they've done a psychological one? Why can't we do a physical one?
Okay.
Well, I don't want to hog the mic, but I think there's a big difference between thinking about a human mission to Mars as a private mission, okay, and one that somehow would involve government interests, okay. Going back to the government interest, just to set that aside, again, it has to be of strategic value. It was a big risk for the human beings who went to the moon during the Apollo days. It was a big risk, the types of risks that we would not be inclined to take today. But what was at stake was deemed to be worth it. In other words, the loss of life was considered to be something that was really worth risking if the outcome was to beat communism and the Soviet Union into reaching the moon. So it depends on what's at stake, the level of risk you're willing to take. In a peacetime effort where there's no rush, a government effort is unlikely to accept the kind of risk that it could somehow avoid if it knew more. Okay, so if we can find out whether Mars has this problem to us, well, then we should address that first before we say. A private effort is a completely different thing. Elon Musk with SpaceX has made it no secret that he, hopes to get humans to Mars within the next 12 to 15 years. This would have to be a mission that would cut some corners in terms of the risk that it would take. It just has to. We would be going to Mars with many unknowns unanswered. But you know what? It's a private effort. Go for it, Elon.
But with what profit possibilities for SpaceX, since it is a company that is going to live or die by its profits?
Yeah, I don't think Elon is thinking of this as a commercial venture, at least not up front. It's more of something that would be, part of the things that, he could make happen with of course, more public and private investments, but something that would be done,
so more of a non-profit model than
for the sake of getting the ball rolling, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just very quickly. I think there is one word, and obviously it's really difficult to use that word today because there are so many issues that we need to deal with, but my big question when I hear all that is, where is the passion? And if this guy wants to put someone on Mars in 20 years from now and he's not making any profit, I have a sense of what's pushing him, you know. So yeah, it's true. I mean, we might be thought of as dreamers, but when you don't have the big political, strategical, you know, goal that pushes behind you, your fuel, your inner fuel is really passion.
One thing that NASA could do very concretely with the space station is ask for its space station crew members to volunteer to come back home and then immediately ship them up to work with Pascal on Devon Island and do a Mars exploration exercise up there. And you know, if you've been on the space station for 6 months, it would be a very nice little postscript to add to our steps toward Mars by dedicating about 3 weeks working back on the Earth, adapting to gravity field, and then doing field exploration exercises in a way that is a small part of this kind of 500-day exercise you mentioned.
If I could make one comment to a question that was asked earlier and then ask a quick question to you guys, if that's all right. Well, the question the gentleman asked in the back about a long-term duration on Mars, one of the things that could be interesting and that I guess isn't super well understood is epigenetics. Are you guys familiar with that? Basically the genetics and the study of mothers with the children inside. One of the things that was a big problem for indigenous cultures is you go there and you don't have a lot of meat. That's one of the falls of the Neanderthals. Eating a lot of plants, and then you get a McDonald's, well, you got diabetes because the baby isn't prepared for McDonald's when it comes out, essentially. One of the things that could be interesting is the first generation of astronauts born there will far surpass their parents. They should be more well adapted because that environment, they're being born inside of it, and so they should, at least I think, be well adapted for that. I mean, if you guys could comment on that. And then the other one is, when's good enough to go? When will you guys be satisfied to say, all right, let's do it?
Well, who wants to tackle that? It's Margaret, you want to give it a shot?
All right, I'll take it as the ecologist and evolutionary biologist. So evolution is something that happens over a very long time. So epigenetics, the idea that we can adapt to certain things, we can adapt only to a certain point. We still are air breathing. You can't adapt me to water by putting me down and keeping me underwater for a long time. So at some point, there's where an ethical question really does come in about the first children born off Earth. And one thing that I'm still rolling it around in my head, I have no problem with an informed consent of an adult making a decision, but that gets to be something very different. In addition, we think about evolution as evolving from, single-celled organisms all the way up through these sentient beings that we are with intelligence. I'm not so sure as a biologist whether or not putting humans up on another planet and staying there for a long time and going through regular selective processes, if we would deselect intelligence. I don't know. Think about it. If the most important thing is to adapt to radiation or microgravity or change in food supply, whatever, could those selection for those things in a natural sense actually deselect intelligence? I don't know. And so what in the long term people are talking about, what is it that our technologies are doing to us as humans? We're talking about putting in computer chips, we're talking about prostheses and all sorts of things. How many changes of us do we get to make before we're no longer us and human? And those questions go way beyond the science. But that's one of the things that astrobiology and missions is good to get us thinking about. You can really play with those issues and say, does it matter for humankind?
Okay, what do you think the psychological profile, skill set, and experience will be the first group of people who get to explore Mars?
Interesting.
Tom?
I don't think that there are any obstacles to the current makeup of people who have gone into space tackling the Mars environment. In fact, I think you'd find it much more engaging than, in some ways, than spending 6 months on the space station where your routine is the same every day. So humans respond to new, fresh environments with a variety of experiences. So I can't think of anything more fascinating than being on the surface of Mars. So the challenge is not surviving the psychological challenges of being on Mars. It's probably more about the cruise to and from Mars itself. And you just have to make it through those 6 or 9 months, and I think the way you reduce those risks is to get better rocket propulsion so that trip time is less, so you can really get to the meat of what you want to do up there.
Just want to answer?
Yeah.
Pascal? Sure.
So that's also a great question. I agree with what Tom said. I just wanted to add that I had a chance, never to go to space, however, but to spend a lot of times on polar expeditions, and at some point in my life I spent a year in Antarctica in a small station as well. And so I've come up with a list of 5 criteria that I feel are really important when it comes to selecting a small crew for a mission like this. So going to Mars would be the same thing as going anywhere else. Actually, it doesn't really matter. The number one quality I think is knowledge. You really want to have people on board who are experts at all the things that they can possibly be experts at and really good at them. It doesn't matter if you don't get along with Scotty, as long as he can get you back to Earth safely, you will survive the trip, okay, and you can deal with Scotty later. Okay, so knowledge is really the key thing, okay. Number 2, I think, is, of course, health, physical health, mental health as well. And that's the general state of health. So in other words, you really want to send people to Mars who really can withstand the journey and its duration, et cetera, its challenges. The third thing is, I think, motivation. It's not just a journey. Most people think, would I give up 3 years of my life to go to Mars and come back? It's going to take more than that. It's going to take 10 to 15 years of training ahead of that. It's going to take many years after that to, commit to debriefing and analyze the data, et cetera. So this is the endeavor of your life if you're going to go to Mars. Okay, so you really need to be motivated by that and by the right thing, by the success of the mission overall. The fourth criterion that I apply is adaptability. Okay, you really have to realize that you're in an expeditionary environment. Okay, you have a plan A, you have a plan B, but what will actually happen is plan C, okay, which may not be a plan at all. Think Apollo 13, think many missions. They have to at some point improvise in order to sometimes survive. And you really cannot have the mindset that, okay, this is not going the way I thought I was told it would go, and I didn't sign up for this. No, you sign up if you sign up to go to Mars, you sign up to die at the launch pad, okay, basically. And you have to realize that this is, again, the adaptability thing. You have to be prepared for drastic changes in your plans, including having to stay on Mars at the end of the stay and not come back to the Earth. The fifth and final thing is really altruism. If you pick a crew to go with you on a polar expedition, okay, for a long duration, you really want your team members to be altruistic. They have to have their teammates and the overall expedition team as their priority and concern before themselves. Okay, you have to be a good team player, basically. So to me, these are qualitative qualities, but they're really important, and you can dig very deep, and you can come up with other qualities that will actually fall into these categories as well.
How large a crew did you have for a year in Antarctica, and did you guys get along?
Yeah, well, I was in a crew of 30 people. Typically, the dynamics in groups like this can go in different ways. Sometimes it's a very cohesive group around one leader, which would be the base manager. Sometimes the crew breaks up into smaller groups. It happens. It was the case in mine. I actually had a fantastic experience. I got along pretty much with everybody, but it was difficult. And part that broke down in many cases was motivation. Okay, many people were there for monetary motivations. I mean, the camp cook, just to describe some random task. Okay, is not down in Antarctica usually for the real sheer excitement of exploring another world. They need the salary that's often 3 times what they get domestically, to make their families survive. Okay, so folks who sign up for something that's very limited in scope sometimes will find a long duration stay, like 14 months, okay, to be a real challenge psychologically. And our cook did great. I'm not singling out the cook. I'm just saying it's a type of task that may not. A scientist will go to Antarctica because they really want to spend time in Antarctica. Okay, a cook maybe not. And
you see this in space. My own experience, I've flown with about 20 people in space. not everybody has the same motivation level or all the traits that Pascal talked about, and I think he's exactly right in terms of that combination of traits and characteristics that you need. I didn't like everybody that I flew with in space to the same degree. Professionally, I could get along with all of them. And so that's something that you as a professional will be challenged by, but you've got to make up your mind to get past personality differences to get to mission success. So there's obviously we take our personalities with us into space. We don't leave them behind. You have to overcome those obstacles. I think for longer duration missions, it's going to be even more difficult. We're going to need better crew selection, better psychological profiles, and lots of practice on the ground or on the space station to work as a team beforehand so the differences and the problems surface beforehand. You can read Diary of a Cosmonaut if you want to see an extreme of the challenges of space endurance and how difficult those long-duration missions can be. I also know some of my space station colleagues, one expedition of 3 went up in the last 10 years, and when they got there, one of the expedition members, after about 5 or 6 weeks in space, said, "I'm done. I've gotten out of this trip what I want, and I'm finished working." So they were on board for 6 months. And so the other 2 crew members, an American and a Russian, had to decide at that point, okay, we have 2 choices. We can all go home together right now and abort the mission, and we'll all be failures. And the 2 of those 2 decided that they were going to cover for the 3rd astronaut, cosmonaut, to do that person's duties no matter whether they participated or not, so that the crew would succeed as an expedition. And then they could deal with the consequences of that non-participant when they got back home after 6 months. And that's in fact what the strategy they did adopt. And they succeeded as a crew, and of course that 3rd person did not fly again ever.
All right, I think this is probably going to be our last question, so the lady, I'm sorry, the gentleman here with the microphone, yes.
Well, my question is, do technology leaders in the space program appreciate the significance, and I think Tom alluded to the subject, but of nuclear rockets as transportation means for manned exploration of the planets, because the impulse energy possible with nuclear rockets could transform the transportation time to Mars from months to weeks.
Well, exactly. Technology offers a lot of promise. We once had nuclear thermal rockets on the test stands in Nevada in the late 60s, early 70s. All of that program was shut down when the Apollo program succeeded and budgets declined. We need to take advantage of that experience and reactivate those programs, but that's a political decision. And the White Houses and OSTPs of the last decade or more have decided that investing the money in testing nuclear systems is not something they want to spend their political capital on because of contamination concerns and flying nuclear reactors in space and so on. But unless we take on those challenges with some leadership and some vision, we're not going to have that available to us. And we need to start now to have it available in 15 years.
All right, you know what, we'll take just one more question. So this young lady here.
We know of a lot of extremophiles on Earth that can survive in really various environments. So going back to the contamination question, do we know specifically of any terrestrial life forms that could possibly survive the journey to Mars and the environment there?
Well?
Yeah, the notion of habitability is what we're focusing on. And so the idea is, are there microbes that from Earth that we know of that could survive the conditions on Mars, physical condition and chemical conditions and such? And the answer is yes. And we find lots of microbes that do very, very extreme things. And that's why planetary protection requirements are still very much a part of the mission. It doesn't stop you. It's a yellow light that says, think about it. And so spacecraft are cleaned, the robotic spacecraft are cleaned very, very well before they go, to the point that every piece that is being stacked onto that spacecraft is cleaned and rechecked. And all of that, the Planetary Protection Office actually signs off on it. And we know what microbes have gone to Mars, and that information is given to the UN.
And Natalie in particular studies microbes that enjoy UV, intense UV. So do you want to say a word about those?
Very quickly, but beyond microbes and beyond contamination of the spacecraft, we already know of not even microbes, but plants. plants on Earth that would survive without any engineering, genetic engineering, for at least several tens of days on Mars. So, and that's something people have been thinking about in terms of terraformation. You know, start by putting plants out there, because they would take the CO2 from the Martian atmosphere and start, you know, making O2. Obviously, that is going to take a long time, but some of them right there, right now, can do it. And yes, as we go up in the mountains on Earth, you have more and more UV radiation, and you have increasing amount of UV radiation in the short wavelengths, UVB. Obviously, we're not going to UVC on Earth, but there are places where you are getting very, very close. And you realize that, well, you know, nobody died there. You have microorganisms that not only are out there, but they are thriving, and they are not even hiding from UV. They are actually trying to get out and get the light when you are trying to mask them. So definitely, yes, we already know of life on Earth that would, I mean, I'm not sure they would be happy on Mars, but they could at least have the time maybe to adapt.
All right, at this point, we're going to wrap it up, but I'm sure the panelists will be hanging out a little bit up in front. If you want to come up with personal questions, that's great. And otherwise, enjoy the rest of your stay here at SETIcon.
Thank you. Oh, same.
For that redundancy.
I'm jealous.
Oh, what a privilege.
Ça me fait toujours rire parce que